Can you do it? I don't mind.
Wonderful, everybody. Welcome to the city's Human Rights Commission. My name is Gretchen Bennett. I'm staff to the commission and use she, her pronouns. And a couple of quick housekeeping reminders before I turn the meeting over to our chair. Just a reminder to please mute your microphone unless you are speaking. That helps with just keeping noise and echoing down. Please do, if you're beginning to speak, state your name and then pause a second, because that assists our ASL interpretation with focusing on you before that proceeds. And again, just a reminder that we are live on YouTube right now. And I also wanted to take this moment at the beginning of the meeting to apologize to our newest member, Drew. Drew had expressed interest in a committee and a work project, and then I did not follow up with him and get him connected. And so I wanted to let everyone know that his lack of participation on those things was on me for not reaching out to him in the interim. So Drew, I'm sorry about that. We've talked about that today, but I wanted to apologize publicly to Drew for that. With that, I want to turn the meeting over to our chair, Angelo.
Yes, hello, Angelo here. I'm a resident of Ward 2 and use he, him, his pronouns. And let's start with introductions, and then I'll pass it on to Mike.
Hi, I'm Mike Waters. I use they, them pronouns, and I will pass it on to Krista Gallagher. Oh, I'm from Ward 7.
Hi, I'm Krista Gallagher, and I'm going to pass this on to Wilma. You were muted, Cindy.
Hi, I am Wilma Marchbanks, and I go by she, her pronouns. And I'm going to pass it to Tricarico.
Hi, Tricarico, they, them pronouns, and I'm in Ward 2. And I will pass it on to Renee.
Hello, I'm Renee H.K. LeBlond, she, her pronouns, and I'm a resident of Ward 8. I will pass it on to, I don't know who's left. Nathan.
Can you guys hear me? Okay, I'm Nathan Schmidt. I go by he, him pronouns, and I'm a resident of Ward 7. And I pass it on to who hasn't gone? Someone who hasn't gone yet.
I'm Drew. I live in Ward 3. I go by he, him pronouns. And I think, did we get everybody?
I think just Gretchen and I have it. I'm Debbie Aguilar, a lieutenant with Salem Police, and I am the liaison between the Human Rights Commission and the Salem Police Department. And Gretchen.
Hi, and I'd like to acknowledge in a face-to-face environment, we traditionally also introduce everyone who's here as a guest. In the interest of time and everyone not talking over each other, I might just read names really quickly if that would be okay. And if you don't, I'm gonna pause in case I've missed a name. I see A. Hugmeyer, Kathy, hi, Kathy Ostrand. There's Kathy. Cindy is on the interpretation team. Evelyn is here. Jordan's on the interpretation team. We welcome Pastor Michael Weaver, who is here. Ryan LeClaire is here today. Pastor Brooks is here today. No, excuse me. Valerie Brooks is here today. Pastor Harris is here today. Did I not read anyone's name? Welcome, thank you. And Angelo, I turn it back to you.
Yes, Angelo here, and so let's go move on to public comment. Do you have any public comment this evening?
This is the time. This is the time when the public can speak about bringing issue to before the board. So Pastor Michael Weaver, that would be you, if you wanted to start.
Obviously, this is my first opportunity to attend one of these meetings, and I want to defer to Bishop Wade. One of the topics we wanted to discuss is Medical Center Drive facility that's open and available, and we'd like to possibly talk about opportunities for the city to partner with Seed of Faith Ministries International in the facilitation of using that location for some type of outreach or program that would assist the community. So I know, I believe Bishop's on, and
Yes, and I'm Bishop Wade, founder of Seed of Faith Ministries here in Salem, Oregon. Been here 23 years, founded that 23 years ago. And recently, well, not recently, but in 2010, we purchased 853 to 873 Medical Center Drive. It's on 23rd and D Street between D and Center Street, next to the Jason Lee Cemetery. And we envisioned it's next to the old birthing center. And we had envisioned of doing some work to help our community. And we're currently doing some drug and alcohol, and we're doing some food banks, clothing closets, and we're just very interested in partnering with the city to do more. Our envision was to help our community, and it just seems frustrating that we've come through a lot of roadblocks in trying to do that. We've did all the funding. Mike is my architect. Well, he's my builder, and he was the one that did all the work over there to change 3 of our office buildings into housing units, which is, what level is it at, Mike? Level 4?
R4 rating, so it's rated commercially to receive all of the programs that Bishop referred to, as well as transitional housing, long-term living, as well for those that are coming or transitioning back into the system or society.
Yes. And we're just interested in just partnering and trying to get it up and running, funding to help, especially during this time. And we actually have met with, and I believe it was Mayor Bennett at one time, Pastor Mike.
Yes, we've spoken with Mayor Bennett, City Manager Steve Powers, and this was about 1.5 years ago, and we introduced several locations to discuss the opportunities, but we've just not moved forward. And hopefully, opening up this conversation in this vein will give an opportunity, maybe for some different ideas to partner with Seed of Faith International Ministries, at least in this location.
Yes, and thank you for allowing us to speak.
You're welcome. I'm pausing for a moment. I wanted to ask a quick question, but it would be customary to stop and see if the commissioners had any comments or questions before staff jump in.
So I do. I have comments. This is Wilma Marchbanks. So I'm familiar with this conversation, and Bishop Wade and I have had several conversations. And at the core of it, the reason why I thought it was a good idea for him to come and speak to the commission today, because it speaks to a lot of, it sounds very discriminatory, the way the funds are being dispersed in the Salem community, with this opportunity to grow and support and fund quote unquote, the Black community. It just hasn't happened. Every step along the way, the city has created roadblocks and has not been very supportive of these efforts. They have the resources, they have the willingness, and they're just asking for support from the city of Salem. And then we're talking a span of 10 years here, to where roadblock after roadblock after roadblock has been put in the way, and they haven't received any funding. And I just think it's time that we as a community and we as a city take a look at that and see why we're dispersing the way we disperse to the same people, and leaving it open to look like it's discrimination, because it very well could be, because the city won't fund them for whatever reasons. I think it's time for us to come together as a community and support what hasn't been done historically in Oregon and in the Salem community, in a way that could be a resource for the whole community.
This is Drew. Right. I have a quick question. So my audio kind of broke up a bit for a second there, but what was this this center that you're putting together being used for?
It's a Medical Center Drive. It's 853 to 873. Currently, we have food banks over there in clothes closet. We're trying to get drug and alcohol and mental health, which we have the people that are qualified to run that. Plus, we have spent several $100,000 in taking 3 of the 11 pods, the buildings, and turned those over to not transitional housing, but housing. So it can do a number of things, and it has 20 units as far as 20 rooms that it can house people. But we just have had roadblock after roadblock and no funding to help us do that.
So with your meetings with the city, you've had trouble getting the funding that you've needed to keep this project going, to make it possible for it to happen. You've hit the roadblocks talking with the city themselves.
We just haven't had any cooperation. And let me say this, Drew. What we've seen thus far is that we as the Black community, African-American community, we are lumped in with POC, people of color. Mm-hmm. And when the funds are distributed, it doesn't come to our community, not the African-American community, nor have it comes to some of the other ones that I've talked to, communities, but it goes to certain communities that are already partnershiping with other entities, and our African-American community is left out, if I must say.
I have 2 questions. One is for our gentlemen visitors, and one is more directed toward the city. For our visitors, I'm just curious to hear more detail around the kinds of barriers and roadblocks that you've experienced. And for the city, as kind of a part 2, I'm curious to know about other faith organizations that you've partnered with, and whether you've partnered with any faith organizations that do have a focus on our Black community. But I'd be more interested in hearing from our guests first, if you don't mind.
I will hand it over to Pastor Mike, but let me say this, because he was the one that did the construction. We've been hit with several obstacles when it came down to the building and things like that, several delays from the city, and then several costs that was not put out there before. We spent almost over $400,000 to get this project going, which I don't believe the city thought we could do it. And then on top of that, with the delays, which was very frustrating for me, we had the county come in and tell us that we had to pay taxes on the building. They assessed us $27,000 in taxes, even though we're a nonprofit. We end up only have to pay $6,000, which I disputed it, but it was very highly unfair because of delays with the city. And Mike?
If I can just add to that, you know, we've navigated through the process. And although it's been difficult, we are where we are. And our goal today is to bring this to the forefront and to move forward. So I guess I would frame this. We've had meetings, we've made the facility available. We're in a situation where our homeless population grows at an astounding percentage annually. Funds are being distributed throughout the city, different organizations, and we've brought this facility before the mayor's office, before the city manager's office. We've had the urban development department involved, and we just haven't moved forward. We feel is that it's at a time, we've got a facility that will house 20 separate rooms, great common areas, a facility that can really be an asset to the community, to the city of Salem. If given the opportunity to partner with the city and to really manage this facility in a way that benefits not only our city, but those that really need the location as part of the housing, the ability to house those communities that are looking for housing, that are out on the street right now. With the drug rehabilitation programs that we can offer, there seems to be a tremendous opportunity that we are missing as a community. And I think you may hear a little frustration, but we feel it's time to move forward. And how do we do that? Bottom line is, how do we move forward? How do we partner with the city? We're available and ready to host a meeting there with all of you at the facility to walk through, to show you what's there, show you what's available, so we can possibly move forward. Thank you.
Well, this is Gretchen Bennett from the city of Salem. I want to get at Commissioner Waters' question, and then also to what the gentleman were saying. First of all, I don't know the answer, Mike, but I can certainly look at that. We have a couple of fundings that flow through the city and into the hands of nonprofit organizations that are doing great work, and that includes the federal program and general fund dollars that flow through the urban development department, the department that the pastor just mentioned. There's a process to apply for grant funding for projects in the social services arena. There's also funding more on the event, tourism, cultural side that flows through the cultural tourism board, which is probably not related, but I'm conscious of the funding streams. And there's projects through Urban Renewal Agency in our urban renewal areas. And I'm less familiar with how those dollars are allocated and don't work directly with those processes, but I'll certainly go back and take a look and get the answer to your question, and also see what I can figure out. Getting to Commissioner Marchbank's point, I'm interested to know if there have been applications made, or if we just haven't located the right, like the why, so I need to dig into this. I also want to apologize, gentlemen, and own my own part. I think the last we connected, I became aware of the property when I was newer to my newer assignment, working on issues related to our unsheltered neighbors. I remember being initially really excited and thinking that I would have a funding stream, and then I didn't have a funding stream. And then I remember learning of a couple of nonprofits that might have some interest in connecting the information to the nonprofits, the Community Action Agency and a couple of others that I hoped maybe would end up being able to partner with you to actualize services. And I'm realizing tonight that it sounds like none of those threads came to be. So here we are, and that must be incredibly frustrating, because that was a couple months ago, I think, when I was connecting with those nonprofits about the space. I had been excited too about the space and its potential, and was sharing it with nonprofits who I thought might be able to manage a service along the lines of what you're hearing. And so I'm disappointed to hear that those things haven't come to be. So I think we need to go back to the drawing board and identify potential solutions, because I certainly agree there's a huge need in the community and you're willing partners. So we need to figure it out.
And I would also like to add that the suggestion has been made to partner with community partners. And my concern is why we don't, this particular resource doesn't need, and there's nothing wrong with partnering, but what they're asking is the agencies that you're asking them to partner with they can do the same exact thing. So you can be partners, but also since you're funding that agency over there with a large amount of money, a really large amount of money went to a community agency, why couldn't some of those funds been allocated differently? Because the same thing you're asking them to partner with, and those partners offer them pennies to nothing, kibbles and bits for according to what the property requires. What they're saying and what I've heard them say is that they can do the exact same thing that they're doing, and instead of having to partner with these community partners, why can't the city allocate some of that large lump sum of money they gave to that agency and allocate some of it to this resource? I don't understand why that's so impossible.
Well, it shouldn't be. Again, I don't know the details of whether the gentleman applied. That's run through a grant process, so that has like an application and a date closed, and then you apply, and then they select from the applications and make recommendations to city council. So I don't know. I don't know what the applications look like and what the criteria for deciding was about that. But I'd be happy to research that and get back to everybody.
Thank you. And I just like to add before I go that this is not new. They've been trying for 10 years and doing what's been asked of them and remodeling, and the $400,000 that he talked about, it came out of his pocket. It came out of his own personal funds, all to be a resource to the community. So it didn't just appear. It's been here. And I think it's really important that the city, that these boards think about funding the Black community. That's what we're asking specifically. I'm just going to call a thing a thing.
Thank you. This is important clarity for me for when I go back and think about the conversations that I'd had with the team. This helps me understand, I think, more completely. And I really appreciate the conversation today. I'll be happy to follow up right away.
This is Evelyn. Could I have permission to speak?
Angelo, is that okay?
Yes, that's okay. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. This is Evelyn McCoy Harris. I am the grant writer for Seed of Faith Ministries. And one of our major roadblocks has been the opportunity to apply. And the availability and knowledge that grants are out there. Like Ani said, Wilma said, we've been seeking opportunities to provide a very vast program at our medical center location, which has 11 different pods, different buildings, 20 of which my husband alluded to that we've converted to housing along with Pastor Weaver. But the roadblock is the opportunity to apply. I actually have an agreement on my desk right now that speaks specifically to small businesses, which that's what we are. A minority business, MBE, that's what we are. A woman-owned business, WBE, that's what we are. And so none of those have really been available for our organization to apply to. But we definitely have the space, we have the staffing, and we have the ability, and definitely there is a need in the community. Thank you.
Thank you.
This is Tricarico. I was wondering that exact information, Evelyn, so thank you so much for sharing. And maybe Gretchen, you can research what is the city's standard or practice for prioritizing businesses with the designations that Evelyn named, women-owned, minority-owned, Black-owned. I know that the governor of Oregon has a priority for that, and I feel that the city should follow suit, as well as, work directly with this group to find those opportunities and ensure that they can properly apply for the funding. I definitely want to see them move forward. I know that the city is doing a lot of investigating right now into what spaces can we find to convert into housing. They're looking into what funding can we get from legislature. I know that hasn't happened yet, But I think it's very important that the moment we get that funding, we communicate that to this group so that they can apply for it or do whatever process is needed to get that funding. Because we all know, the housing crisis right now is really bad, and we need as many places we can get, and we need places that are welcome and affirming to the Black community. So I appreciate you looking into that, Gretchen, and I appreciate the guests coming to speak today. If you encounter any more roadblocks, please reach out to us and let us know how we can support you.
This is Drew again. This may be a question for Gretchen regarding the situation, because I'm still kind of learning the whole process of what the Human Rights Commission does. So in this situation, what would the next step be regarding their complaint to us? Would we make a recommendation to the city to remove those hurdles? Would we make a recommendation like, hey, this is a good thing, we need to get it done? Or what's our next step? And then a follow-up question would be, I like what Pastor Weaver was saying about opening it up. I don't know if it's ethical or not, but to have any member of the city or the Human Rights Commission or whatever go look at the facility to see what's coming into the community, because I think that's an important factor also, because I think of a lot, and I'm not seeing it myself, but knowing some of the guests, that I feel like that if we saw the facility, then I think it would really behoove the city to like, hey, this is actually going to be a good thing for the community, and I think we should stop these hurdles and move forward.
Thank you. My first thought, it's common to make sure first that we have all of the information correct. I'd really want to hear the opportunity in more detail, what the roadblocks have been, and start gathering information from the folks that have funding available, and start dissecting exactly where it got stuck. And then move forward from there. I don't think I know yet, without gathering a little bit more information about a precise recommendation. We don't have funding ourselves to be able to allocate, and I don't know the current status of what may or may not be available. And so I hate to jump ahead. I think a little bit more information would be really helpful to help us see what the next steps would be.
This is Pastor Weaver. Would it be okay for me to speak at this point? I'd like to ask, and where I believe, and respectfully, Gretchen, it feels like this is where we get stuck. When we table the conversation to gather more information, and then there's no complete follow through or comeback to center to where we started. So periods of time pass, and then we find ourselves at the same place year after year after year. So I respectfully, I would appreciate the opportunity to know, what is the need? What is the need of the city? What is the need of the housing units? What does the city need? And have someone say, this is how this facility might fill that need. And then we start looking for funds to fund it. But if we can identify the need so that we know that there's a revenue stream out there, if we can just pinpoint the need for the facility, look at the facility, look at the number of rooms, look at the opportunities, and then potentially assign a program to it and say, now let's go get the funds for it.
That sounds like a really logical roadmap. I don't think any of the individuals on the Human Rights Commission necessarily have that right at their fingertips to answer it immediately tonight. I'm trying to remember the name of the document that's up on the city's webpage. It's a pretty comprehensive document that did a needs analysis that gets into quite a bit of detail about the need for affordable housing in Salem and the need for more shelter spaces and services. I want to say it's our consolidated plan. And that was worked on in the spring. In fact, you might remember Shelley Erringer came to the Human Rights Commission back in the winter and got feedback from you all about that as she was working on that. And council approved it in the spring. It's on the web page, and I believe answers what you're describing, what is the housing need, but I'd want to talk with the planners to gather that answer more completely. It's outside my personal area of expertise, but I will certainly commit to do that with you within the week. I really hear the urgency and the frustration. And then, like you said, what is the next step? I remember talking with staff about going out and seeing this space. And so I need to see where things got stuck and see what happened. But the Human Rights Commission is really positioned to hear concerns of discrimination, which I think we're hearing tonight. Why is there a roadblock? Why isn't dollars and opportunity flowing into the Black community? And so I'm sure the commission wants this investigated in a timely fashion, but I don't think we know the precise answers tonight. And I regret that, but just not being housing developer myself, I don't know how to answer other than to say, let's work on it.
Can I ask a question, Gretchen?
Yeah.
Sorry, it's Debbie Aguilar. For Pastor Weaver, because I actually have not heard of this facility. So from the police aspect, I'm wondering how the facility could be utilized. So for example, because we don't have our sobering facility, and that's a big hurdle for a lot of us. Would this be something where if we were to find somebody who is in imminent need of shelter or was maybe suffering from mental health, was suffering from drug abuse, and we find them on the street, that we would be able to bring them to the facility? Or how would that work? How would people be located?
That would be possible. We just need to identify the target programs that would best fit the city for that location. But it is available for those very specific needs that you mentioned. Yes.
Okay. I could see value in that. Absolutely.
And this is Drew Wright again. Quick question again for Gretchen. So regarding this, is it ethical for any member of the planning of this commission to schedule to go see the facility like they asked, or is it not a thing for us to do?
Forgive me, I forgot to answer that part of your question, and I apologize. I don't see any reason why you couldn't choose to do that. This body does not directly provide funding, does not allocate dollars or develop housing programs. And so off the top of my head, my first blessed answer is I don't see a conflict of interest. And if you wanted to visit, it would just simply create the opportunity to amplify your ability to see the opportunity in the building. I've been there before, and I can see, and I get it. I see the opportunity there. It would be a great place to operate a variety of different types of programs. And so I can appreciate that if you'd like to. It's not something that's so I don't see why you couldn't go see it. It's right off the D Street.
Tricarico here. I have another question for Gretchen. Who does make these decisions, and do they have public meetings that we can, connect this group to or be a part of? Because it sounds to me like maybe there's some accountability lacking and some transparency lacking. And I would imagine that, many members in the community, not just members of the community who are trying to make a facility, would want to know how these funds are being allocated, who they're going to. And so how would we get that information or provide them access to that information?
Thank you. It's a great question. I also probably only have a partial answer to, and I hesitate to speculate. Ultimately, any money that the city is allocating is ultimately coming up as recommendations to city council. And so things are on the agenda. I know for the specific the social services grant dollars, there's opportunity posted on the webpage, and we do our best to advertise it through social media and the webpage and all of the other places where we explain, here's the criteria for the money, here's when the application is due by, etc. And then the applications move forward. I'm less familiar with, for example, the work that's done with the Housing Authority and the Urban Renewal Agency and some of those strategies, which also I know contribute to identifying more resources for affordable housing and shelter services. So again, it's outside my area of expertise, but I'm noting the question and need the opportunity to go get the information so that I'm accurate.
You know, this also gives me the thought that there was a lot of discussion last year about whether some of the city's partnerships with faith-based organizations were in themselves discriminatory. And so I think it really raises kind of the discussion that we were having around how city contracts and how city money flows to organizations, and whether and when the city will look into using an equity lens to evaluate these types of transactions, because ultimately, if we have a good community organization that serves the interests of the specific community, you know, that should be looked at along with organizations that do not serve the whole community, that actively, you know, have discriminatory backgrounds or practices that we've been looking into. It just seems like there is a real lack of transparency around the city's partnerships with organizations of various sorts. And so it would be really helpful to us, I think, as a body, even if we're not making decisions about contracts, we should be making recommendations about how the city enters into those contracts.
I think that's the work that the commission has begun to undertake with studying equity lenses and examining what kind of tools and questions and assessment tools could be brought forward. I want to check in on time. Is everyone comfortable with where we are right now? Good.
Yeah, Angela here. Would anybody else have any questions or anything else the speakers want to say?
I'd just like to add, this is Pastor Weaver again, I'd just like to add that we are available to any of the commission that would like to come out, schedule a time that we could come out and tour the facility. So at your schedule convenience, we'll make ourselves available.
And before we end, I would just like to say that in our community, we have small Black businesses that don't have the opportunity or the gift of having a grant writer on their staff, but we have small Black businesses. And because the process to access this funding, it's like buried so deep in language and policy and procedures. And it's almost like a maze trying to access how to apply for this funding. And so as a result, there are many small Black-owned businesses that don't. And then I even asked someone at the city, do you guys have like a training for individuals to teach them how to figure out this roadmap you have up on your website to access this funding? And they didn't. So the barrier is that the barrier is the process to access it, the language that they use to access it, the process. It's a total barrier. It's like you go into Never Land and you have no idea where what's happening. So most people, what I hear is, why bother? And that's very disheartening when you have your ear to the community and you're talking to people in the community and they think that, why bother? Because it doesn't matter. They're not going to fund us anyways. We're not going to get any of it anyways. They give it to everybody else. And this is historical. I'm not speaking to just this group. I'm speaking to the history of Salem, Oregon.
Thank you. That's important.
That would change.
Thank you. That's important feedback. I think it's critical that you shared it, and I know it's the last thing I would want anyone to feel. There's a couple of resources I want to be sure to connect with everybody that I know I'm personally aware of. It's, again, not my area, but I know there's a small business person whose sole role is to help small business owners in Salem connect to all of the different grants and loans and services that are available. And I'd love to figure out how to connect that position with the small Black-owned businesses that you're describing, because they're able to provide that personal one-on-one kind of navigation that can be really helpful, like you said, and help having it not get stuck. So I'm really interested to talk with you more about who I can connect that person with. A few years ago, there was an effort, there was kind of a recognition that there's overall contracts and grants that are available from not only the city of Salem, but also large private contractors and other public entities like the state of Oregon and the counties and things and the school districts. And so a local organization formed called Salem Capital Connections. And it really strives to reach out to small business owners, owners of, communities of color. Business owners in particular has always been a priority for the Salem Capital Connections. And what they do is they try to bring together people who have contracting opportunities with people who want those contracts, and kind of demystify the processes, have a place to just be able to talk and get to know each other. And that's been an effort for several years now, where the group meets monthly with that whole objective of having it not be so impersonal. So I'm really interested to hear more about how we can facilitate those introductions and get folks connected. It's painful to hear. That's the last thing I want anyone to feel in Salem and to experience.
I'd just like to say thank you for the opportunity to come on tonight and speak to everyone. We look forward to the opportunity to follow this all the way through.
Yeah, this is Trick-Erica. Thank you all for being here today and sharing this with us. I would love a time to come check out the new facility and see what you have to offer and see who we can connect you with to get this going. So really, thank you for being here.
And this is Bishop Wade Harris, and I want to say thank you, Gretchen, and thank you, Ani, for inviting us, and all the ones, the commissioners. Thank you for just hearing our story. Thank you for that.
It's Angela here, and I'm also personally interested in going to visit this facility because I think it's important. And I apologize that we won't have really an answer tonight, but it's really a complex issue, and so but I really do want us to follow through with this, not just be stuck like we've been stuck. And so hopefully, Gretchen, we can also connect and work something out and work through this process.
And this is Evelyn. I just put my direct dial in the chat box. Again, like I said, I'm the grant writer for the organization. I'm married to the pastor, Wade Harris, and am very interested in moving forward with any agreements, contracts. Our department is very thorough with regards to certificates of insurance and the required limits, and carrying out all of the requirements for the said future contract.
Once again, thank you. And then do we feel like we can move on for today? Or do we have anything else to say? All right, I will take that silence as a we can move on. And so let's do the consent calendar, approval of agenda and approval of minutes. And then somebody can just go ahead and give me a first to approve the agenda and the minutes.
I motion to approve.
Do you have a second?
I'll second.
All right, all those in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, it's been approved. All right, we can move on to action and our discussion items. So bias crime update, Gretchen?
Actually, I'm going to turn that over to Lieutenant Aguilar.
Okay, Debbie here. So we had 3 incidents that I'm going to talk about. 2 are bias crimes. 1 is a bias incident. 2 of these are late reports to me. So they happened back in May and June, but the reports were just really slow getting to me. So I apologize. The first one I'm going to talk about is a bias incident that happened on May 16th. And it happened in the northwest part of Salem. The victim, who's deaf, hired a man to do her lawn work, and they had agreed on a price. He wanted to get paid the full price prior to completing the work, and when the victim said, "No, I'll pay you when you're done," he became really angry. He damaged her fence and her lawnmower bag, as well as after leaving the scene, sent her multiple text messages because they had communicated on the phone. Sent her multiple text messages that were disparaging towards her as a deaf person, hinted he would hack into her electronics, threatened to kill her. So she called us. I will say a younger officer went to investigate, and he did a phenomenal job. He actually wrote a subpoena to gather the information on the cell phone and track the person down. And the person, suspect, unfortunately would not agree to meet with the officer so he could arrest him. So there is a warrant for the person's arrest. So this is a bias incident, but clearly was very hurtful to the victim. So we have that one. Hopefully we'll have an arrest soon on that case. The second one is a bias crime. Again, this one was a little late getting to me. It happened on June 26th at a business in Northeast Salem. The suspect walked into a business and was yelling at everybody inside, appeared to maybe have some mental health issues. As she was inside yelling, she spotted another female, walked over to the other female and took her mask off and spit in the female's face, while the suspect female was yelling that she hated the female victim because the female was white and the suspect was Hispanic. she ended up leaving the scene, and officers were called. We did end up contacting the suspect and charging her with 2 different crimes, a bias crime and disorderly conduct. The third was also a bias crime. It happened in Northeast Salem at a business. The female went in, the suspect female went into the business. It was a convenience store, and took a cup, got herself some water, and then walked out. The employee said to the woman, hey, you know, it's store policy that if you're going to take a cup, you have to pay 25 cents or whatever the cost was. The female got really upset, yelled at her, and then walked outside, where another employee said, hey, the other employee is just trying to do her job. The suspect then used some racial slurs against the victim employee, and then also spit in her face prior to leaving the area on foot. And we haven't been able to make an identification on that suspect or clearly contact the suspect to make an arrest. So those were the 3 that were reported to us. Any questions? Oh, we did. I don't know, Gretchen, do you want to talk about the one with the flag? I guess I forgot that's that would, I guess, be a bias incident.
Sure. Lieutenant Aguilar is noting that this week we became aware of a flag that has a hate symbol displayed at a private residence, and also what looks like a noose hanging on the private residence. And I understand contact has been made with the family to try to understand what's happening and to kind of have conversations to see what can be done. Both those actions are technically legal, but of course disturbing and hard for people to see. If there's no other questions for Lieutenant Aguilar, I can jump into my part of the report. Let's see, I worked this month with the individual who came to see us last month and to share concerns regarding an organization, and listened carefully and tried to hear. There were procedural concerns and just an overall the way a meeting is operated and the procedures in which the meeting is experienced, and how the individual experienced that was kind of at the heart of it. And the opportunity to identify all of those norms and processes which need to be examined to ensure equity and accessibility in a process, in a group meeting. So it was a really good conversation. I learned that several months ago, there had been some work done and some facilitation to try to address the different steps and processes, but that did still end in the person's resignation from the group, and they're not interested in continuing with that particular group. I'm still kind of in dialogue with that person, but right now the focus of the conversation has become more on identifying specific suggestions or tips in a meeting context that can be applied and recommended to organizations that are operating meetings to ensure that some of those things and processes that people take for granted are examined. Like if you're at if a decision is scheduled, one of the issues was there would be a meeting where there's a decision scheduled to be made and it's on the agenda and everything, and the group moves forward and has their discussion and makes their decision. The individual isn't present for that meeting, but then would like to recall the conversation, and a majority of the group feels the decision's been made and wants to move on, but the person who wasn't able to be at that meeting would like access to participate in that conversation. So those kinds of challenges in, you know, when do you make changes and alterations and when don't you, is kind of an example of it. It got me thinking about the work that the Human Rights Commission is interested to do in recommending ways to have accessible meetings, the ideas that are coming up later in the agenda about pronouns and interpretation. And it got me thinking that I think there might be some nuggets from this conversation I'm having with the individuals involved in this situation that might help us identify some things that can flow into this tip sheet we're talking about. Let's see, I also learned, oh, go ahead.
Before you move on to another topic, and I know we're not talking about the specifics of the organizations, but in the comment that we received via email, as well as this comment, weren't they both neighborhood associations?
Yes.
And I was just curious, you know, what kind of guidance does the city provide to neighborhood associations around non-discrimination? Are neighborhood associations, are they self-organized or city organized? Can you just maybe explain just a little bit about that? Because it seems like both of those incidents stem from that very same root. And I'm just curious about it.
Thank you. Yeah, and it's a good question that comes up, because the city, what the city does is recognize a neighborhood association, but the neighborhood associations by definition and state law are independent. What I understand is that cities are required to gain information and input from independent organizations. And at some point along the way, a neighborhood association was identified as an example of the type of independent organization that can provide that type of input into land use and planning processes. So by definition and design, neighborhood associations are independent entities. And it's important, there's an important separation. The city can't allow them to be arms of the city, to be part of the city, to manage those, because then they cease to have the independence that's necessary for the city to be able to seek the input that's needed in the land use world. So they're independent organizations. There is some code that explains what needs to be in place in Salem Revised Code to be recognized as a neighborhood association, and that comes due to review. And related to the one that you have in your email, one of the pieces about that is that process of review is happening in October. But other than that, we don't have any kind of authority over neighborhood associations to weigh in on decision-making or anything.
So essentially they're created to provide input to you, but you don't have any mechanism for making sure that they are non-discriminatory in their practices of soliciting that input. So really, there's no way to ensure that the input includes any minority voices at all, if I'm understanding how they're structured.
I don't feel completely finished with my own study of the question yet, but I think you're right. But I would hate to answer that. I'm not fully prepared to answer that question yet.
Thank you.
Yeah.
To follow up on Mike's question, this is Tricarico. Wouldn't just the standard Chapter 97 anti-discriminatory things cover those entities, just like they would cover a private business? Yes, and so so of course the Human Rights Commission sets in with their process, you know, initially in a voluntary way, to explore were there violations of the code, you know, and there's situations that are experienced as biased and discriminatory. And then there's situations that could be seen as specifically a violation of Chapter 97.
And those can be two different things. And we always try to help regardless. We don't want to mince words or make it complicated. You know, if someone is experiencing and reporting discrimination, you know, like for example, to take the example of the simple example of if you hold a meeting and you make a decision and then you're unwilling to reopen that decision at a next meeting, that may not be a violation of Chapter 97, but it may be something that a person can do to help welcome people who would like to revisit questions, if that makes sense. There's things that are not violations, and then there may be things that are violations. If a person is excluded from something due to their identity, for example. And so we have to study each situation and see, and our process begins with that work of reaching out and trying to gather information and learn to see what the circumstances are in each situation. But yeah, you're right, because Chapter 97 applies to our whole community.
So I guess my follow-up would be, I think you kind of touched on this. Once we have those recommendations about accessibility, can we send those out to the neighborhood associations as just like a, hey, here's a helpful tool to ensure that they're being inclusive? I know we can't like go around auditing people by any stretch, but I think it'd be kind of nice to communicate these are the expectations we have of organizations within the city on their accessibility. And also here are some resources, because I'm sure other organizations are also struggling with the change in communication that we are experiencing because of all these virtual environments. So it's a good thing just to offer that help, but also communicate expectations about inclusivity.
Sounds good. Yes, absolutely. I made a note. Let's see. I also worked with someone who let me know that they had been not able to work. They were paused from working at their job given a pending complaint, and they were concerned that the length of time was excessive, and were concerned that the length of time related to their gender identity. I provided some information and referral and offered to assist directly, but then the person ended up being reinstated with back pay and was satisfied with how it resolved. So that ended up ending. And then let's see. The third is the situation that you have in your email. And I'm still working on gathering information. I've had conversation with one of the authors of the email, and then with, I've made some initial reach out, but I've still got work to do in sorting that situation. I also had a person call from out of state and say they were considering moving to the area and were wanting to assess both housing availability and LGBTQ accessibility and friendliness in the area. So I answered their questions. I think that's all I've got to report on this section, unless there's any questions for me or input.
All right, looks like we can move on to accessibility of complaint process. And Gretchen, you have this one as well, or does somebody else do it?
Well, I'd be happy to. This is a check-in from the discussion at the last meeting. This one ended with an opportunity for commissioners to reach out to specific organizations to discuss our complaint process and try to learn or identify if there's barriers that we can strengthen. Speaking of accessibility, we wanted to make sure the process is accessible. We're hearing in the community that there's bias and there's discrimination. We're not hearing as many of those reports as what exists. And so we wanted to figure out how to close the gap and figure out what's getting stuck. You know, speaking of our public comment earlier, where is it breaking down and what can we do to fix it? So several commissioners signed up to reach out to organizations. This agenda item is an opportunity in case anyone wants to report back on those discussions verbally, or you could also contact me outside of the meeting. But that's all we have on that topic tonight.
Yeah, like I was one of the people who signed up to do outreach with other organizations. And as of right now, I don't have anything to report. Some of them have gotten back to me, but it's just like, introductions. So I don't feel like it's, necessary to report at this time. I believe, Gretchen, can you remind me who else signed up to do this?
I don't have the list in front of me. I'm so sorry. Let's see. I think Alex, but I don't think she's here tonight. She was worried she was going to be late. I think Felicia had signed up, but I don't see Felicia tonight. So that might be why we're not hearing any other hands raised. I'll follow up with each commissioner that has signed up to take organizations and see how that work is going. But it's also, in addition to that outreach, if anyone does experience where are the gaps, like this conversation in the public comment was an important example. Like it's important to hear when something gets stuck, and keep moving it and keep trying to fix it, and so I'm grateful for this input tonight. And I think that's the kind of thing we're needing. If someone's out there not getting what they need, finding the process confusing, not seeing a way to report something, we're here to help eliminate those barriers and fix that. So if just as happened tonight, if you're aware of those kinds of situations, please bring them to our attention.
Angela here. And yes, please, if you can do outreach, please do so. And, if you find out any information, report it to us. We would like to hear it. And then if nobody has anything else to say about that subject, I think we could move on to pronoun recommendations. And I believe that's Mike.
We did discuss pronoun recommendations at our LGBTQ rights task force, and I'll talk during the task force update about the name of the LGBTQ rights task force. We were, I think, still a little bit in research mode on some resources. Tricarico and I and Alex were all going to go back to our resources that we had seen and had on hand and see if we could collect them up. So I don't think we have anything new to report today other than we were just gathering what those documents would look like. Does that sound about right to those that were there?
I might add, if you don't mind, and this is me at the 11th hour getting the notes to you, minutes before this meeting. I think at the task force, the idea was to recommend the 3 simple steps around pronouns this evening, like that they be expressed in the Zoom name and expressed as part of introductions. And there's a third in the LGBTQ notes that we can take a peek at. But then, yes, as Mike said, a more complete tip sheet would emerge in September that would include resources. And I think we had a broader concept, speaking of intersectionality, the team had a good discussion about there are a variety of identities and tips and things that can help improve accessibility that we could put into this tip sheet and then share one comprehensive recommendation with organizations like neighborhood associations and others that can help improve accessibility and explain like what we're looking for. If you want to run a meeting, well, this is what that looks like.
Thanks for that reminder, Gretchen, because you were absolutely right. That is in the LGBTQ notes. And the 3 main things were that we were going to explain a little bit about why it's important to respect people's pronouns. We were going to share kind of the places where pronouns can be shared through meeting introductions, as we did tonight, on your Zoom profile, using your pronouns in your name. And then on name placards when we're back in person was another area where we looked to recommend pronouns. And then we also talked about ways to politely correct when someone is misgendered. So those were kind of the 3 areas that would be on our tip sheet. On a real high level, they're pretty easy to put together, but we also did want to do the work of getting it into a kind of a formal document, which we can bring, I think next month would be just great. Or even maybe send it out over email for people to look at ahead of time.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add. Thank you.
One place, this is Tricarico, one place Alex caught when we were at our last tabling event is the little like clip-on name tags that we have made. That'd be a great place to add them. And Mike and I added ours in, but it might look nicer if they were printed.
And don't forget, if you'd and we talked about it being voluntary, but if you'd like for me to have that information so I can add it to those things, please share that with me so I can do that. I don't want to make assumptions. And so I'll reach out if I haven't heard from you too, to see what you'd like to do. Great. I think I might just go ahead and move us into the next agenda item, if that's okay, because I think Angela will turn that to me. The next agenda item is also from one of our groups, the awareness team. Initially was a formal committee and then found it difficult being just 2 or 3 people, because if 2 people talk to each other and your committee is only 2 or 3 people, you constitute a quorum. And so that was difficult, and the group decided, does this really need to be a formal committee, and became an informal work group. And so your awareness team has been working informally. However, we wanted to reflect and clarify whether that's appropriate, and recently clarified if we're going to conduct work that would be deliberating, a group of people deliberating towards a recommendation to the commission, which is a public body, then it would be important for it to become a formal committee. After some discussion and thought about the work, is because on the one hand, perhaps the awareness committee is carrying out the work already approved by the commission, and perhaps that's not necessary. In other cases, perhaps they're deliberating and thinking of ideas that can end up being recommendations up. My understanding is the conclusion of the conversation was to go ahead and suggest that the group be formally recognized as a committee. That ensures public access to those conversations. So we would post the meetings and just like we do with the other task force. So the idea behind you tonight would be to formalize the awareness group to become a formal committee. I don't think the day-to-day life of it'll change, except I'll make sure to get the meeting posted and it'll go on YouTube, etc. But the experience of the commission members would probably not change. So I think the idea tonight is to ask for your support in becoming a formal committee. I should ask, Commissioner Waters has chaired that group. Mike, do you have anything to add?
I don't. I think, especially during the time of COVID, that this would allow for greater accessibility to the meetings, as well as, see, I say I don't, and then I start talking. I really don't. I think it makes sense to be a formal commission. Thank you. Formal committee.
Yeah, Angela here. I got disconnected somewhere. I'm guessing we're talking about, doing formalizing the awareness task force. Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, and I don't know if anybody has any other questions. We could have a motion and vote on that unless there's other discussion or questions. Are there any concerns about that idea or any opposition? Very good. We'll just go ahead and proceed with that then. Thanks, everybody.
All right, we can move on to Angela here. We can move on to task force and project updates. Speaking of awareness. Go ahead, Mike.
Well, we had a relatively busy month where we released our discrimination survey results, and they were picked up by the Salem Reporter. I want to thank Chair Arredondo especially for taking the reporter's call. I ended up being really sorry that she quoted me so much because I thought your quotes were outstanding, so thank you. The kind of next steps around awareness were one, that we want to continue to use those survey results in communications out to our community, whether that's sharing some of the information over social media. We've also talked about doing some commercials with CCTV that would bring to light some of what we saw in the survey and encourage people to use the Human Rights Commission as a resource, and to share that, especially that people can report concerns to the Human Rights Commission without the need for it to always be a crime. That we really want people to report any experience of discrimination to the commission so that we can be aware of what's happening in our community. So those are where our next steps were, to sort of build more of a communication plan for sharing the survey results more broadly. And then we did talk about and I think everyone on the task force found favorable the idea of repeating the survey, making it a somewhat annual event depending on our resources to do that. That we would want to encourage higher participation in the survey. We did experience, and it was a lot behind the scenes, and Gretchen knows this, that we experienced some challenges just in putting the communications together around how we use terms. You know, when our community takes a survey and they tell us that that something's important to us, my inclination is to want to be able to say, this is what the community said or how the community responded. But because of our sample size, at times we used language a little differently. Respondents to the survey said, and so on. So getting a larger sample size would be a really good goal for us for the next survey. As well as we saw with this survey that we had not great representation from all of our groups in Salem. I think the biggest representation gap was our Hispanic community, where only 7.7% of the survey respondents were Hispanic, and we have upwards of 20% Hispanic in our community. And that's not to say that the other groups that were underrepresented were not important, but that was a particularly big gap. So anyway, that was our update from our meeting. At our next meeting, we'll talk more about that broader communication plan, some of the commercials for CCTV, and we would just share those communications with you as we go for your feedback and comment. I think that's everything to share. Anything else, Gretchen, I might have missed?
All right, thank you, Mike. And then we can move on to core response. And then I'm not sure how much I can share, but I believe our September training we're waiting to see if that can happen, right, Gretchen?
Yeah, that's moved from confirmed to tentative status. And so we're needing to clarify that. Very interested, Oni, also in talking with you. Our tentative trainer is Bella, to do some work with us on oppression, and interested to explore more what some opportunities might be with you too.
Okay, we can have a conversation. I look forward to it.
All right, thank you. And I think that's it for correspondence at this time. So we can move on to Equity Lenses and Chapter 97, Tricarico.
Yeah, so I'm trying to reschedule my appointment with the contact I had, and we keep missing each other, and I'm not sure why. So I haven't had an opportunity to connect with them. I was hoping maybe Alex had. So I'll just keep reaching out and trying to connect. And then once I get it, I will just email it to Gretchen to share with the rest of the commission so I can quit delaying and get it out there. But I think, as we've seen today, now more than ever, having that equity lens is really important when we're looking at transparency with any association in the city, but especially the city itself.
If I may, would it be okay to add a little bit to the update?
Sure. Yeah. If you've gotten some, let me know.
Well, one of the organizations that you'd been in contact with out of Chicago, Alex and I were both on that call this morning and really learned some very cool tools. One of the things that perked my ears up was there's a tool that assesses how to prevent systemic racism from seeping into planning processes. And I thought, boy, that's really timely. There's so much planning that happens at the city. And there were also some assessment suggestions and tool resources shared that Alex and I heard about. The person was going to email us kind of some documents and suggestions coming out of the conversation. So again, I can share that with you, Tricarico, and others that would be interested. I think we'll be able to take a look at these examples as well as other examples that have been collected from places like Multnomah County, and then try to determine which nuggets look really helpful for us. A second part of the update, Angelo, I don't know if you would want to do that, but also Tricarico had found a city that had added to their list of identities protecting people who are unsheltered or homeless as an identity. You remember that was a discussion that's part of this as well. And Angelo, I can turn that part to you if you like.
Gretchen, go ahead and do that one because I think you're better at explaining things than me right now. And so go ahead.
Well, bless you. No problem. I think that Tricarico had identified a city, I think Madison, Wisconsin, that's listed based on your status of whether or not you have a home or if you're unsheltered or homeless, that would be in the identity list, just like our other identities like race and ethnicity and age, etc. Angelo emailed them and received 2 really good emails, I thought, back that kind of provided an explanation of what led to that decision. And it was really over, it sounds like, challenges with people who are unsheltered and had trouble accessing bathrooms, utilizing restrooms in places of public accommodation like coffee shops, and then feeling discriminated against when they were trying to do that. It sounds like business owners were reporting challenges with damage after sometimes some of the people were using it. And so there was kind of conflicts in the community. And ultimately the group laid out a process that reminds me a little bit about our process, where a person can report if they experience discrimination, like if they're unable to access a restroom due to their housing status. And then you can move through a process to determine if that discrimination happened. And there was provision that businesses can expect certain behavioral codes of conduct. You know, you can expect someone to use the restroom in an appropriate way. So they kind of managed to a decision. And so we have the example of how that process works in that community. I think we've got 2 next steps as we contemplate the idea here. And one would be, again, I think it'll be really important to understand what is the experience of people right now, and is there discrimination due to the housing status? You know, not the behavior. If somebody commits a behavior or a damage, that's different. But if someone is discriminated against or not allowed somewhere that other people are allowed to be because of their housing status, what are the reports and the examples that we know in Salem about that? Kind of what's the issue? What are the stories? What's the narrative? What are the scenarios that we're trying to solve for? We need to understand our problem here in Salem more. The next step is a legal review of how would that work in Oregon. It's getting ahead of the state in this case. And so what, I think there's question about how would that work from a legal standpoint that we need to study. And I can initiate that side of the study. But first, I think it would really help to understand more about the problem in the picture. So if you're hearing people who are unsheltered reporting discrimination, I think it would be really helpful to share those stories and get that information to me so that we can develop an understanding of the need.
All right, thank you. I think we can move on to LGBTQ rights task force. Mike?
Hello again. So at this month's meeting, we talked about our webpage where we are going to put LGBTQ community resources on the City of Salem website. And these are different from the resources that are already off of the Human Rights Commission site. The Human Rights Commission has a list of resources that are primarily for people who are experiencing discrimination. And our resource list is a little more broad than that. Certainly some of the organizations might be appropriate for people who are experiencing discrimination, but they're also just community organizations, places for people to get together and commune and that sort of thing. One of the things that we talked about in LGBTQ rights was whether we wanted to extend the offer for other types of groups that are community organizations that are affected by the Chapter 97 categories, whether they might want to be on a community page as well. So our committee was very favorable to that idea, that if we wanted to gather community resources for other types of communities, that we could kind of put together a community page. That said, we decided we're going to move forward with our page with the LGBTQ organizations that we have. And if the commission is interested in pursuing adding other community organizations, then we would just kind of fold that into the work and just keep adding. More is more when it comes to community, I think. Obviously, we talked about pronouns and you heard the update on that. Our last update from LGBTQ task force is that we actually discussed changing our name. We recognize in our task force that the primary beneficiaries of LGBTQ rights over the last half century have been white cisgendered people and white cisgendered people in monogamous relationships as well, because so much of the focus was on marriage for so many years. And we feel that our work is a bit more intersectional than that. Every issue that we've dealt with on LGBTQ rights has had tentacles into other communities that experience discrimination. And so we felt that we should examine whether we want to change our name to be more welcoming and inclusive of everyone in our LGBTQ community, as well as welcoming of other people who experience discrimination. So we made the recommendation together. We worked on a couple different names, and the name that we liked was LGBTQIA+ Intersectional Task Force. And I know that is a bit of a mouthful, but you have to understand that in our community, we like alphabet letters a lot, because the more that we add, the more inclusive we're being. The two letters that we would be adding to LGBTQ are I and A. I tends to stand for people who are intersex, who are born experiencing different gender characteristics from what is often portrayed as normal. Normal, air quotes, please, like not really normal. And then the second group are asexual people who often find that they're not very well accepted in the LGBTQ community because they don't experience depending on the person, and it's all individual, and you get all this. But often just don't feel that they're accepted as part of the community. So that was our recommendation, and we just wanted to see if the commission had any concerns with us moving forward with that name change.
This is Renee. I have a comment. I just wanted to thank Mike for providing the further additional explanation for the name change. And I think it would be helpful if anywhere that we do outwardly discuss the committee, that we do provide some of that background, because I think that sometimes people see those long acronyms and they feel unsure of how to proceed. So they don't know what the acronym means. So they kind of tune out or don't participate, or maybe don't engage because they don't know what that means. So I think it's helpful to have maybe an explanation, or you know, how sometimes there's an abbreviation to show like, this is what that means, or this is why this is important. So that way people that feel excluded can see that this is a welcoming group, but also people that don't understand can maybe feel a little bit more enlightened or more understanding.
Thank you. I really like that idea. And I'm looking around to seeing nods from the committee members that are here. So thank you.
Yeah, Angela here. I just have a question. Would we have to vote on this name change, or does the task force has to vote, or how would that work?
I don't think it's particularly spelled out in the bylaws. I think that Commissioner Waters checking in to see were there any concerns, to me, would be sufficient.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I don't see any concerns, so I feel like we can, the task force can move on with that name change. All right, our other project update is Unsheltered Neighbors. Krista?
Well, this month we don't really have anything new to add. I was not able to go last July to the meeting, but I think that Gretchen maybe has more updates. I know she did some work on that. So Gretchen, if you have anything to add, you can go right ahead.
Sure. One of the documents that was, oh, this is Gretchen, sorry. One of the documents that was emailed out at the 11th hour today is the current status of the survey. You might remember that we were interested in trying to understand what the gaps are for people for shelter services and other services that might be accessed by our unsheltered neighbors. Gaps or barriers related to specific populations, or like what's needed. And so we have the survey document. We've edited it a couple of times, and that's in your email. The idea is to check in here again tonight and then release the survey in August. And so take a look at it if you can, and let me know if you have any suggestions for how the questions are phrased or other questions to add, and then we'll work on getting the data collected.
All right, if nobody else has anything to add for that, we can move on to youth outreach. Nathan? Hey, Nathan, if you're speaking, we can't hear you.
Me? Hello? Oh,
Yes,
oh,
we can hear now.
Okay, yeah, I'll start all over again. Okay, so I'll run through that spiel again. We have been in quarantine for what? Like, I think I've lost count, like 6 months or something now since March. Time really doesn't matter anymore. But there hasn't really been a chance, I'd say, for most youth to interact with other youth. However, I know that we have been gaining a presence more online. I think, we're starting to get a lot more people coming to our meetings, which is a really good sign. I think, news of the Human Rights Commission is spreading rather immensely through the community, which I think is a really, really good, pointer, basically showing that, we're getting out here youth outreach wise. I know that Angela has been doing a lot of work with that kind of stuff. Angela's doing a great job with that. And we have been basically following along with developments. I encouraged a few people. I was talking with some people about, I think it was some rally, and I encouraged them to come to the meetings. I don't think they came to this meeting, but I've been working on telling people about our committee. If you guys can still hear me, sometimes the microphone cuts out. Okay, I'm getting a nod from Gretchen. Sounds good. Yeah, so that's been youth outreach. Kind of difficult with the pandemic, but we're working through it.
Yes, Angela here. Thank you, Nathan. Yeah, it's kind of hard to do any youth outreach. I think the only resource we have is online, social media, because we don't have, anywhere where, like, when we're in school, we have, school. That's where we can, set a table and do all that. But right now we don't have that, so it's kind of hard to do youth outreach. But we're doing our best by using social media. All right, Gretchen, any staff updates?
I do. I've got a couple things. First, speaking of social media, stay tuned if I can get a specific post time of day, but we're anticipating some social media on Friday. There were a couple of requests coming out of the awareness group about social media posts, and I understand that communications team is finalizing and hoping for Friday. So just wanted you to be aware of that. And if I can get a time that they post, I'll email and let you know. You might remember previous conversations were about you could go on and like and share if you chose, because that helps it be seen by more people if people do that kind of quickly. I also wanted to ask, I noticed there's a community petition circulating related to the use of body cameras and dash cameras in policing, and it had referenced the Human Rights Commission as part of the process that it recommended. And I was curious if anyone is in dialogue with the folks working on that, and I would be interested to hear more about that or connect in some way if that makes any sense at this time. But wanted to share that I noticed HRC listed there, and I'll pause for a second in case anyone's in discussion on that. Okay, and then also just wanted to point out, we had had a conversation earlier related to the conversations around policing and some of the topics that were before City Council and some of the things happening here at the Human Rights Commission. Wanted to provide a little bit of an update. The City Council has scheduled a work session for September 21st to look into and examine processes that relate to work when it's not a criminal matter. Like you've heard Lieutenant Aguilar describe some of the interactions that are incidents, that are situations that aren't illegal or criminal in nature, but police would have interaction with. And so that's kind of the topic of a work session coming up on September 21st. And also there's now a request for proposals out related to a performance audit that'll look at a lot of different things, but that should be coming back to us soon. That potential audit organizations are taking a look at the criteria and getting back to us. And we're formulating some committees related to the receipt of the audit applications and to select an audit, and then another group moving forward that'll help us along the way with that process. And I'm so it's at the beginning stages, but just wanted to let you know of some of that work that's ongoing. And I think that's all I've got related to staff update.
All right, how about the community calendar?
Is Capitol Pride happening this month in a virtual way? I didn't get a chance to go peek.
You know, I think that it was moved to September. They are moving forward with a virtual celebration, but it won't be on the original date, I think. If you give me 2 minutes, I'm sure I can check the latest.
I know World Beat Wednesdays continue to be something through the World Beat website that people can access. And I understand the Capitol is going to release information about a virtual multicultural day coming up as well. But I'm not aware of any other calendar events. I don't know if others are aware of any.
I validated that it's going to be in September, but they haven't announced specific dates or events, but I understand it's going to be a series of virtual events.
All right, thank you. If no any other events come to mind, I think we can finish off with member remarks or announcements. Anybody?
I didn't hear what you said. What'd you say? Announcements or what?
Yeah, member remarks or announcements.
Member remarks?
Yes.
Okay, you keep cutting out, so I'm not sure. So I don't know if this is the time, but I have some remarks that I'd like to just bring forward before the meeting's over. Is that Gretchen, I really look forward to having that conversation with you. From my understanding, there are over 340 different boards in Oregon where people sit and make decisions for community members. I think it's really important that these various boards who are historically occupied by all white people go through systemic bias training. And the reason why I say that, because even today, as I sat on this board and I listened in, and some of the language that was used was very harmful. And it's harmful and you don't even know that it's harmful, right? Because how will you know unless I say something? For instance, when we talked about the noose and the flag and how he talked about it's not against the law, but it's legal, it's still violent to a Black person. It's still very violent. And how long has history hidden behind the law and made things okay to continue to be violent towards certain groups of people? Another comment, it was at some rally, and I'm sure you probably were talking about a Black Lives Matter rally. Let's just say it. Those are called microaggressions. And so we learn those things because the trainings haven't happened. These boards haven't been called to task to learn something different than what they've always known. And so, and it may not have been a Black Lives Matter, but that's what's going on now, because a lot of, some rally, it probably has to do with Black lives or police brutality. And it's okay to say those things and voice those things, because what's really important in sitting on these boards and being a part of these conversations is I, as a Black community member, am really frustrated with sitting on boards and having conversations without change and making excuses about, I don't know, they don't know what water they're swimming in, and we are continually experiencing violence. And it's ongoing. And so we have to learn and unlearn the way we've always done things and the way we've always had conversations and the way we speak. And it's being mindful of difference, being mindful that I am the Black woman in this group and that there is a lot going on right now. And the language that we use, right? Because you don't know what you don't know. And so I really look forward to having a conversation with you, Gretchen, around some possible training and having a consultation around that, because we got to start somewhere, and we're in a perfect time. There's a lot going on. I don't know if you noticed, but the world is on fire. There's a lot going on, and for good reason. George Floyd didn't wake me up. I lived this thing. I lived this thing. I have a list of names. Thank you.
Hey, Gretchen. I was gonna, that's actually a good segue, because I remember I talked with you, I think it was maybe 2 weeks ago, about this bias training that I was taking. It was an online class. They usually present it in person, but because of COVID, it was online, and it's called Understanding and Countering Bias. And it's presented by an instructor. She's a professor at Central Oregon Community College, and she's a social psychologist. And it was really, really interesting information. It was really easy to understand too. She kind of boiled it down into, it's not very technical. She boiled it down into kind of information that the average person can understand. So I don't know if it's kind of along that line that Wilma was talking about, that that might be something that, if we're interested, either doing it as a group or if people want to do it individually. I know that she had talked about presenting it again at some point. So that might be an option too. It was really, really, I really got a lot out of the class.
Thank you, very good. Wilma, I'm so glad you said what you did. That was really precise feedback, I think, about how I phrase a report and an update. And I think in what you just said, I will absolutely examine how I talk about a situation in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any other remarks?
This is Drew. I just have one thing to say. I appreciate, as one of the new members, I appreciate what Commissioner Marchbanks had to say. And I totally agree with everything that she said, because unless you're told, unless it's brought to your attention, you don't know that you're making a mistake and saying something or whatever. And I think it's important that we use this platform that we have as human rights commissioners to make a statement and make a change, because our voice, a lot of us don't know this, but our voice is important. We're an advisory commission to the city council, which makes decisions. And I believe we need to use that platform to the best of our ability. And because words without action are meaningless. And if we don't act on our words, then we're just going to be going in circles and circles and circles, and nothing's going to get done. And like I like what Wilma said, that we're living in some weird times, and Portland's on fire. Surprised Salem's not on fire. but we just need to we need to use this platform to the best of our ability and use our voice to make some changes in this community.
Thank you. Anybody else? All right. If not, I think we can adjourn this meeting. Gretchen, is that how I end meetings?
You're doing great. Yeah, there's no formal way. It's good to see everybody. Important conversation tonight.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye. Have a good
Bye.
night. Talk to you
Thank
soon.
you. See you soon.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Gretchen.
You're welcome, Jordan. Nice to work with you.
Thank you, you too. See you later.
Pastor, are you still here with me? Hello?